The night was cold, and the city was unforgiving. Beneath a flickering street lamp on the corner of a quiet alley, Daniel Hayes pulled his tattered coat tighter around his frail frame. Once a carpenter with steady hands and a warm home, he was now just another shadow among many, forgotten by the world that moved too fast to notice him. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but it was nothing new. What weighed heavier was the silence of being invisible faces passing him daily, never meeting his eyes, as if he were less than human. As Daniel curled himself on a flattened cardboard box, something glimmered faintly on the pavement a few feet away. He shuffled closer and picked it up. A leather wallet, heavy in his hands. His calloused fingers opened it, and inside he saw a small stack of cash, neatly folded. His heart pounded. It was more money than he had held in months, maybe years. His throat tightened with the temptation. With this, he could eat for weeks, maybe find a cheap room for a few nights. For a moment, he let himself imagine warmth, food, and dignity. But then, tucked behind the cash, he saw something else. An ID card, military issued, with a stern photograph of a man in uniform. The words United States Navy SEAL were printed boldly across it. Daniel froze. He had heard stories about men like this, trained, disciplined, guardians of freedom. And here was a piece of one's life in his trembling hands. Daniel's conscience battled fiercely. He had every excuse to keep the money. Life had dealt him nothing but cruelty. Why should he care about some soldier who probably lived in comfort, while he begged for scraps? Yet the thought of betrayal churned his stomach. His late father's voice echoed in his memory. "Son, no matter how poor you are, never let poverty steal your integrity." With a deep sigh, Daniel made his choice. He tucked the wallet securely inside his coat and set out to return it. He knew it would not be easy. The address on the ID was across town, miles away. His feet ached, his stomach protested, but he walked through the night, determined to do what was right. When he finally reached the small apartment building listed on the card, the sky had begun to lighten with dawn. Exhausted, Daniel knocked on the door, unsure of what reception awaited him. The door creaked open, and standing before him was the man from the photograph, broad-shouldered, battle-hardened, and sharp. This was no ordinary man. His presence radiated quiet authority, the kind earned through years of sacrifice and unimaginable trials. Daniel's voice shook as he held out the wallet. "I think this belongs to you," he whispered. The Navy SEAL took the wallet, inspecting it carefully. Then his eyes lifted, locking onto Daniel's. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Something flickered across the soldier's face, recognition, perhaps respect, or even astonishment. What Daniel did not know was that this chance encounter would set in motion a series of events that would change both their lives forever. For in returning what was lost, Daniel was about to gain something he never expected: dignity, purpose, and the possibility of redemption. The winter wind bit through Daniel Hayes's worn-out coat like knives. He pulled it tighter, but the fabric was so frayed it barely offered any protection. His shoes, once steel-toed boots from his carpentry days, were cracked, soles half detached, letting in the cold with every step. He shuffled slowly down the nearly empty street, keeping his head down. hoping the occasional passerby would not sneer or turn away in disgust. Daniel was used to being invisible. He had been invisible for years now. People rarely looked him in the eye, and if they did, it was only to measure the distance between themselves and a man they assumed was dangerous, lazy, or broken. None of them knew his story: how he had once built homes with his hands, how he had once sat at a family dinner table with laughter echoing off the walls. All of that was gone now. His wife had left when the bills piled too high. His son, barely a teenager, was living with her in another state. And Daniel, unable to keep steady work after an injury, had slipped further and further into the abyss until the streets swallowed him whole. Tonight was colder than most. The kind of night that reminded him of the warmth he no longer had. He found his usual corner under a flickering street lamp, laid down a flattened cardboard box, and tried to settle his aching body. Hunger twisted inside his stomach, sharp and merciless. He had eaten nothing more than a bruised apple the entire day, handed to him by a kind stranger who did not linger long enough to hear him say thank you as he shifted. Something glimmered faintly on the pavement a few feet away. At first, he thought it was just a piece of trash catching the streetlight. But when he crawled closer, his fingers brushed against leather. A wallet. Daniel lifted it with trembling hands. It was heavy, sturdier than anything he had touched in weeks. His breath caught as he opened it. Inside was a neat stack of cash, several $100s, maybe more. His heart raced. He had not seen that kind of money in years. His mind spun with possibilities. Hot meals, a room at a cheap motel, maybe even new shoes to protect his feet from the cold concrete. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to dream. He could walk into a diner, order a full breakfast, and eat until he could not take another bite. He could have a bed tonight, a shower, a blanket that was not damp with rain. He could feel human again. But then, tucked behind the bills, something else caught his eye. An ID card. Military issued. He held it closer to the flickering light. The face that stared back at him was serious, disciplined, the kind of man who carried the weight of responsibility in his eyes. Printed across the card in bold letters were the words, United States Navy SEAL. Daniel froze. His breath turned shallow. He had heard of Navy SEALsmen trained beyond the limits of ordinary endurance. Warriors who carried out missions most people could not even imagine. Heroes, the kind of men who lived with honor, loyalty, and sacrifice. And here was one's wallet, now resting in the hands of a man who slept on sidewalks. The cash burned in his palms. The temptation roared inside him like a storm. He needed this money more than anyone. Did it really matter if a soldier lost a few $100s? Surely a Navy SEAL was well provided for, with benefits and support, while he, Daniel, had nothing. But then a different voice cut through the storm, a memory of his father. A simple man who worked with his hands just as Daniel once had. Son, his father used to say, no matter how poor you are, never let poverty steal your integrity. A man can lose everything in life, but if he keeps his honor, he is never truly broken. Daniel's throat tightened. His father had died years ago, but his words rang louder now than ever. Tears pricked at his eyes. He looked again at the wallet, at the cash, at the ID card. He imagined the soldier who owned it, perhaps on leave from duty, perhaps carrying the weight of invisible battles. What kind of man would Daniel be if he betrayed that trust? With a long, shaky breath, Daniel made his decision. He would not take the money. He would return the wallet, even if it cost him another night of hunger, another night on cold pavement. He tucked the wallet securely inside his coat, its weight now a strange mix of burden and hope. The ID listed an address, across town, several miles away. It would take hours to reach on foot, and his body already screamed with fatigue. But his heart had never felt clearer. Daniel rose from the cardboard bed, tightened his coat, and set out into the dark city streets. Every step was painful, every gust of wind sliced against him. But with each block he crossed, he carried not just a wallet, but a choice that could define the man he still hoped to be. The city was not kind to men who walked without purpose. Daniel felt the eyes of strangers on him as he trudged across town in the early hours of the morning, clutching the wallet to his chest as though it were the last valuable thing on earth. His breath came out in visible clouds, rising into the night like smoke from a fire that was burning itself out. His legs ached, but each step carried him closer to the address printed on the ID. He passed shuttered storefronts, the glow of neon signs flickering in the distance, the occasional rumble of a bus echoing through the empty streets. At one corner, a group of young men leaned against a wall, laughing too loud, their eyes narrowing as they saw him. One called out cruelly, "Hey, old man, spare $1." They laughed again, mocking him, as though his poverty was a punchline. Daniel lowered his head and kept walking. He had no time for shame tonight. After hours of walking, the skyline began to change. The neighborhood grew quieter, cleaner. The sidewalks swept, the air lighter. He recognized the kind of place where curtains were drawn tight at night, and where a man like him would not belong. By the time Daniel reached the small apartment building listed on the ID card, dawn was just breaking. The first pale streaks of light cut across the horizon, painting the world in soft shades of gold and gray. His body screamed with exhaustion. His feet felt like they had walked through fire. But when he stood before the door with the matching number, his heart pounded harder than his weary legs. He hesitated. What if the man thought he had stolen it? What if he called the police? Daniel imagined being accused, dragged away in handcuffs, his honesty twisted into suspicion. For a moment, he almost turned back, but then he thought of his father's words again, echoing steady and strong. He straightened his shoulders, raised his trembling hand, and knocked. The sound of footsteps on the other side made his breath catch. The door creaked open. Standing there was the man from the photograph. His presence filled the doorway like a wall, broad shoulders, steady posture, eyes that seemed to measure and weigh everything in an instant. His short-cropped hair and clean jawline left no doubt. This was a man trained to face battles most others could not. Daniel's throat went dry. The wallet felt heavy in his hands as he held it out. "I think this belongs to you," he whispered, the Navy SEAL Michael Cross, as the name on the ID revealed, took the wallet without a word at first. His eyes scanned it, then flicked up to Daniel's face. Silence stretched between them, thick and unyielding. Michael's gaze was sharp, assessing. He was used to reading people, to sensing truth or deception in the smallest twitch of a muscle. He studied Daniel's hollow cheeks, his weather-beaten skin, the way his hands trembled from cold, not guilt. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, steady, carrying a weight of authority that made Daniel's chest tighten. "Where did you find this?" Daniel swallowed hard. "On the street. Near the old gas station on 5th. I thought it was right to return it." Michael's brow furrowed slightly as he looked down at the wallet again, then back at Daniel. Something flickered in his expression, curiosity, maybe even respect. "You walked all the way here?" Daniel nodded, unsure whether to feel pride or shame. I didn't have a choice. I couldn't keep what wasn't mine." The silence returned, but it felt different now. Michael's eyes softened, just enough for Daniel to see that this man, hardened by battle, was not made of stone. Then, in a gesture Daniel did not expect, Michael stepped aside. "Come in," he said. "You look like you could use some food." Daniel froze. For years, doors had only closed on him. To have one open, especially from a man like this, stirred something he thought he had lost long ago. The faint, fragile spark of hope. The warmth hit Daniel like a wave the moment he stepped inside Michael's apartment. It was small, but orderly, everything in its place, everything with purpose. The scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air, and for the first time in months, Daniel felt like he was in a place that breathed of comfort, of home. "Sit," Michael said firmly, pointing to a chair at the kitchen table. His voice was commanding, yet not unkind. Daniel obeyed, his body sinking gratefully into the seat. He had almost forgotten what it felt like to sit on something other than cold stone or damp cardboard. Michael moved with precision, pulling mugs from a cupboard, pouring steaming coffee. He slid one across the table toward Daniel, then opened the fridge, pulling out eggs, bread, and bacon. The sizzle of the pan filled the room, a sound that made Daniel's mouth water and his stomach tighten painfully with hunger. He wrapped his hands around the mug, the heat seeping into his frozen fingers. He brought it to his lips, inhaling the rich aroma, and took a slow sip. It burned, but in the best way. For a moment, he closed his eyes, letting the sensation anchor him back into being human again. Michael glanced at him from the stove. "So," he said casually, "you could have kept the wallet. Why didn't you?" Daniel's eyes dropped to the dark liquid in his cup. He hesitated, then spoke softly. "Because it wasn't mine. And because if I'd taken it, I would have lost the only thing I had left." Michael turned off the stove, setting a plate of food in front of Daniel. The eggs were fluffy, the bacon crisp, the toast golden brown. Daniel stared at it, almost afraid to touch it, as though it might vanish. "What's that?" Michael asked. Daniel looked up, confused. "What's what?" "The only thing you had left." Daniel's throat tightened. His voice cracked when he whispered, "My integrity." He picked up the fork with trembling hands, tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. "My father used to say that if a man has honor, he's never truly poor." Michael sat across from him, watching silently as Daniel ate his first real meal in weeks. Each bite seemed to restore color to his cheeks, strength to his frame. For a long while, the only sound was the clink of fork against plate. When the food was gone, Daniel leaned back, exhaustion settling over him. I used to be somebody, he said, almost to himself. I built homes. I had a family. But then, things slipped. An injury took me off the job. Bills piled up. My wife couldn't take it anymore. She left, took my boy with her. I couldn't stop the fall. And now, he gestured vaguely at his ragged clothes. This is what's left. Michael's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in judgment, but in recognition. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. You think you're the only one who's fallen? His voice was low, steady. You think I don't know what it's like to lose? Daniel frowned, surprised. You're a SEAL. You're supposed to be untouchable. Michael gave a humorless chuckle. Untouchable. I've buried brothers who were closer to me than blood. I've seen things that don't leave you when you come home. And when the uniform comes off, when the missions end, you're just another man trying to live. But the world doesn't always let you. You fight wars overseas, then you come back and fight a different kind, here in your own head. In your own heart. Daniel studied him, seeing for the first time the shadows beneath Michael's eyes. The man before him was strong, yes, but not invincible. He carried scars no one could see, I thought. Daniel hesitated. I thought men like you had everything. Michael shook his head. Men like me only have what we fight to keep. And sometimes, we lose. The two men sat in silence, the air heavy with shared truths. Different worlds, different battles, but the pain was familiar. Then Michael spoke again, his tone softer this time. You walked miles in the cold to do the right thing, when no one would have blamed you for doing the opposite. That tells me you're not broken, Daniel. Not beyond repair. Daniel blinked, stunned. Repair. Michael nodded. Yeah, you just need a hand to pull you up. And I've got one to give. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the faint stirrings of something he had thought dead hope. But with it came fear. He shook his head slowly. I've been disappointed too many times. People promise, then disappear. I don't know if I can. Michael's gaze was unwavering. Then don't believe words. Believe actions. I don't walk away from people who've earned my respect. Daniel's eyes widened. Respect, for me. Michael gave a single nod. You chose honor over survival. That's something even hardened soldiers don't always manage. Yeah, I respect that. The words landed heavy in Daniel's chest, like an anchor. But instead of dragging him down, they steadied him. He swallowed hard, unable to speak, afraid his voice would break. Michael leaned back in his chair. Here's the deal. I've got connections, shelters, programs for veterans and civilians, people who can help you get steady work. I can make calls, but it'll only work if you want it. Do you? Daniel's heart pounded. His instincts screamed at him to say no, to protect himself from another disappointment. But then he looked at Michael the soldier, who had looked at him, not with pity, but with respect. And he realized he wanted to believe again. He took a long breath. Yes, he whispered, I want it. Michael extended his hand across the table. Then, let's start here. Daniel stared at the hand, calloused and strong, offered without judgment. Slowly, with trembling fingers, he reached out and took it. In that moment, something shifted. For Daniel, it was the first step back toward dignity. For Michael, it was a reminder that sometimes the greatest battles were not fought on foreign soil, but in the act of helping another man stand. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Daniel could have imagined. Michael was true to his word. He made calls, vouched for Daniel, and opened doors that had long been sealed shut. Daniel found himself in a shelter that was more than just a bed. It was a place that gave him stability, routine, and dignity. He received clean clothes, regular meals, and, most importantly, a caseworker who believed in him. At first, Daniel felt like an imposter. Every time he looked at the bed, every time he ate food without wondering where it came from, guilt tugged at him. He had lived in the cold for so long that comfort felt almost like theft. But Michael checked in on him often, grounding him when doubts crept in. One afternoon, as they sat on a park bench sipping coffee, Daniel confessed, "I keep thinking someone's going to come and tell me this isn't mine, that I don't deserve it." Michael shook his head firmly. Deserve has nothing to do with it. You earned this the moment you chose integrity over desperation. You didn't just return a wallet. Danielu reminded me that honor still exists outside the uniform. That matters. The words sank deep. For years, Daniel had carried nothing but shame. Now, slowly, pride was beginning to take root again, not arrogance, but a quiet pride in the choices that defined him. Within a month, Daniel had work. It was not glamorous, a maintenance job at a warehouse, but it was honest, steady, and paid enough to keep him on his feet. For the first time in years, he held a paycheck in his hands. He stared at it long after the others had gone home, fingers trembling over the ink. It was not the money that moved him, but the proof that he was not finished, that his life still had chapters left to write. When he showed Michael, the seal clapped him on the shoulder with a grin. "That's what I'm talking about. One step at a time." Daniel laughed, a sound rusty from disuse. It startled him at first, but it felt good, better than good. Months later, the two men stood together again, this time outside a community center, where Michael volunteered with struggling veterans. Daniel had come along, nervous but willing. He sat quietly in the corner as men and women shared their battles, addictions, nightmares, broken families. For the first time, Daniel realized he was not alone. His scars were not the same as theirs, but the pain was shared. When it was his turn to speak, he hesitated. Then he cleared his throat. "I'm not a soldier," he began slowly. "I'm just a man who lost his way. But a while ago, I found a wallet. I could have kept it. God knows I needed it. But I didn't. I gave it back. And the man I gave it to, he helped me find my feet again. So, I guess what I'm saying is, if you're here, you're not finished either. If a broken man like me can start over, so can you." The room was silent for a moment, then filled with nods of understanding. Michael, watching from the side, felt a quiet swell of pride. He had seen courage on the battlefield, but this was courage of another kind. As the seasons changed, so did Daniel. He saved what little he could, built connections, and slowly began reaching out to his estranged son. The first phone call was clumsy, filled with long pauses and awkward words, but it was a start, a bridge. And Daniel knew that with time, he could rebuild not just his life, but his family. One evening, he and Michael walked down the same street where Daniel had first found the wallet. The street lamp flickered overhead, casting long shadows. Daniel stopped, looking at the spot on the pavement where his life had shifted. "Funny," he murmured. "Everything changed right here, because of something so small." Michael stood beside him, hands in his pockets. "Small choices make the biggest battles, Daniel. You won yours that night." Daniel smiled faintly. "No, we won. You gave me a chance when no one else would." Michael turned his head, his expression steady but warm. "You gave yourself the chance. I just made sure you didn't waste it." They stood there in silence. Two men from different worlds, bound not by pity or charity, but by respect. In the end, Daniel Hayes did not become rich. He did not become famous. But he became something far greater, a man restored, and Michael Cross. The Navy SEAL hardened by war, found healing not through medals or missions, but in lifting another man from the ashes together. They proved a simple truth, that integrity can spark redemption, and that sometimes the greatest victories come not from what we keep, but from what we give back. Acts of honor may seem small in the moment, but they ripple outward, transforming lives in ways we cannot imagine. A wallet returned led to dignity regained, friendship formed, and the healing of two broken men who discovered that strength is not measured by circumstance, but by choice.